I said, I do know that you have books, I said it that way, or perhaps some other items that belonged to the Jewish people. Somehow you were able to get them. About how many items of Jewish interest, Jewish background, Judaica, does the Vatican have? And he thought for a moment. Now this answer is going to lay you away.
Welcome back to another episode of Inspiration for the Nation. This has been one of the most hectic weeks of my life, thank God. You'll hear about some really special personal news at the end of this episode about me. But enough about me. You're going to hear about one of the most fascinating people I've ever interviewed. I think as of today, he's 90 years old. When I did this interview, he was 89 years old. And he is one of the most fascinating people, Rabbi Benjamin Blech. He's a Chashav Rav, and he's also, in a certain way, has like a lot of Indiana Jones-like real deal experiences. That he is the most unique experience with the Pope. They have a very interesting relationship, very impressive. He found some secrets in the Vatican, that the hidden Jewish treasures that you were like, hey, where'd all the Beis HaMikdash stuff go? Yes, you've heard stories. You will hear it from the source, as well as the incredible discovery he found with the missing papers from the Rambam in this farm that actually brought a new light to halachas that we never knew. So, and he also got a new lease on life when he was told that it's his end, but it wasn't his end, and it's not his end, and he shall live a long and healthy life. This episode is in memory of Shimon David ben Yaakov Shleima, Miriam Sarah bas Yaakov Moshe, as well as Simcha Beryl David ben Avram Moshe. This podcast is powered by two incredible podcasts, as well as Simcha Time. You're going to hear all about them, and get to the end of this episode because there's so many gems. Get ready. Here's my conversation with Rabbi Benjamin. I'm Yaakov Langer, and you're listening to Inspiration for the Nation. Here I am with Rabbi Blech, who wrote 23 books and counting. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a 24th coming out soon at one point. Could you tell me a bit about your background and where you're from?
I was born in Switzerland, and in 1941, my parents were wise enough to recognize that we got to get out of here. It's true, people always say, but Switzerland was neutral, remained neutral. Yes, that happened, but many members of our family scattered throughout Europe, Eastern Europe, didn't make it. And it was a very wise move that we left, that we were able to leave. And I was a little boy of 8 years old, and I left with my parents, my family, on the last boat out of Europe. The last boat, so much so that there were books written about it. The trip, which was supposed to be like maybe 2 weeks, so took 3 to 4 months because the captain had to veer round and round since there were German U-2 boats and submarines, and he had to make sure that we weren't hit by any one of those. So it was a trip to remember. There were people who died on that trip. This boat is famous. It's called the Navimar. What happened was the captain realized that there were many Jews who needed to get out. And so a boat that was meant for 14 people had hundreds. They put bunk beds up. There wasn't enough food. There people died. My father got typhoid and had to go off the boat at Havana. Thank God he was finally cured. But it was something that left a deep mark on me. I'll tell you in a moment why that's so significant for me. Sure. In terms of my future life and what I did. But I saw death. I saw the horrors of the Holocaust. It's an interesting thing that when people talk about survivors, they usually mean those who were in concentration camps. And he's a survivor, she's a survivor because Auschwitz, because Bergen-Belsen, and so on. And I really believe that every Jew who survived, and with whatever level of difficulty, is a survivor. Because Hitler, Yamach Shemo, had a plan to eliminate every single Jew on earth. And if we persevered, and if we survived, we were survivors. But that I mean that obviously God had a hand in selecting us and being part of those select few, those precious few, about whom God said, I want you around. That's an idea that I understand more and more the older I get. But even though I was 8 years old at the time, I felt it. I felt that we were fleeing from those who wanted to destroy us. As a child, you say, why would anybody want to kill me? What did I do wrong? You don't really get it. But as I went on in my life, and then I went to yeshiva, and then I studied Torah, in terms of what I would do with my life, it's almost like I can't just do nothing or be nothing. Well, you started with the books, and I say, I need to leave a legacy. Mm-hmm. I need the world to be a little bit different because I almost didn't make it, because God said, miraculously, I want you here. I have an interesting comparison. If I just go off the topic for a moment,
let's do it.
I think it's fascinating because a few months ago, I noticed something that I believe has a profound message for us, for everyone today. Obviously, we were all deeply immersed in the plague and COVID, and people were dying round about us. Just 2 years ago, you remember what it was like, and it was a horror. What I just saw a little while ago is the number of people worldwide who died as a result of COVID has now reached a little more than 6 million.
Wow.
That is so significant because the number 6 million speaks to the Jewish people in a remarkable way. And when it speaks to the Jewish people, I think anybody of sensitivity must also understand and grasp the deeper meaning of 6 million. The number is almost incomprehensible.
I can't even, 1,000 is a hard number for me to comprehend.
They say the only way that the outside world is able to grasp it a little bit is one by one by Anne Frank. So Anne Frank is known and gives people a taste of, and then multiply Anne Frank by 6 million. The point that I'm making, though, is even for us today. Now, thank God, we, my wife and I, didn't get COVID until like a few months ago.
I want to mention you mentioned you shortly got it after you're on Kosher Monday.
Yeah, shortly after.
Okay, I'm sure you should have a way better experience after this.
It was a mild case, and it was, and we were at that point already. We were vaccinated, double vaccinated with the booster shot and all. However, just as now, I say to myself again, people were dying round about us. So every person who survived that horrible period must in some way have sufficient feeling or spiritual mission, if you will, to say, if I manage to stick around, I believe firmly and fully it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it was God who said, okay, now time for him to go because I got some plans for him and he has some things to accomplish that in terms of ultimate good for the world are significant. So I consider my books a way of helping to pay off a debt, a divine debt, in that as a little boy, there were many people, and many people in my family. My family, let's say my parents' families, come from Poland and were victims. We all, as Jews, had people who perished in horrible ways. You can't simply call them survivors. I think that anybody who survived post-Hitler, Yamach Shemo, who said, I will destroy, kill, get rid of every single Jew on earth. Hey, I made it. I made it.
That's incredible. And I want to get to, we won't get to all of your books. I want to get to one in particular. But before that, I know you have this remarkable story with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Could you share that story with us?
Absolutely. You're jumping ahead. So
because we only have an hour, so I want to get to.
So I'll get to how to make that leap.
Sure.
I am a 10th generation rabbi. Wow. My father's a rabbi, his father was a rabbi, and so on. And therefore, if people ask me, how come you went into the rabbinate, the question would have been, if I didn't go into the rabbinate, how come? But I was quite serious. And the intro that I gave you before is something that as I grew older became a mission, became something that I recognized I needed my life to have meaning. Some people want their lives to make money, and some people want meaning. I choose meaning. And so I went to a number of yeshivas. I have an interesting history, and this will play a part in the Lubavitcher Rebbe story as well. I went to first Torah Vadas, And then I went to Yeshiva University. Even at the time when I went to Yeshiva University, I'll never forget, in summertime, I had off. And I said, I can't be off. I'm not learning. And I was the first YU person to go to Lakewood Yeshiva and ask if I could learn there for the summertime. They said, boy, it'd be great for us to get somebody from Yeshiva University. Maybe we can start a trend. So I learned during the summer. Those are two worlds. You'll see why that's so significant, Lakewood and YU.
So you're officially the first YU BMG Bacher.
That's correct.
Wow.
Yeah. At the end, they said to me, after the summer, they saw that this was good material. They said, you're not going to leave. You're not going to go back to YU. You're going to stay, of course. I spoke with my father, and my father, all of a sudden, said something fascinating. People in Lakewood at that time were encouraged simply to sit and learn, sit and learn, sit and learn. I'm not criticizing or condemning or even saying that that's the way it is today. But the goal was simply to develop personally. And my father said, that's not good enough for you. You have talent. What you need to do is to go back to YU so that you can have a congregation and you can teach and you can influence other people. And even though that will be at the cost of not developing yourself into a huge Talmid Chacham, I'm pretty good. But if you want to be a real Talmid Chacham, you have to sit and learn almost 20 hours a day or something. I listened to my father, and therefore what I did was I got smicha. I got a pulpit. I was a rabbi of congregation, Young Israel of Oceanside. And at the same time, shortly thereafter, I became a Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshiva University. And then when I was doing all of this, and I must say I was quite successful in the sense that I had a lot of talmidim and people who learned a great deal from me. My wife, who just happens to be sitting here right now, but yes, you can't see her. My wife said, this is all well and good, but you're only influencing the people that you come in contact with. You need to write books, because through books you can reach out to tens of thousands. As it turned out, close to 500,000 people have read my books on various subjects. So we get to Lubavitch Rebbe, as you asked. Among the various unusual, amazing, incredible stories of my life, and if we have time, we'll get to it.
Yes, please.
I met the Pope, and I had talks with him about the return of holy objects that the Vatican has that belong to the Jewish people. That's another story. I met with very prominent people, and I had some great opportunities to do things that are historic. But you mentioned the Lubavitch Rebbe, so I'll tell you that story. I was going to be having a sabbatical after close to 30 years at my congregation, and I get a call from Lubavitch, and the person says, the Rebbe wants to see you. I had had no previous contact with the Rebbe, with Lubavitch as a movement, but I said, what would you possibly want? And he said, he wants to talk to you. You just come. Of course, the Rebbe said. I went, and the Rebbe then said to me after some preliminaries, I know about you. I know the things that you have accomplished in your books and so on. I want you to go with your wife to the Far East, and I want you to spread Judaism. I want people there who have not had the opportunity to learn sufficiently or know enough about Judaism. I want you to go and speak in all these various places. I must tell you that it was a bit rude of me in that my first thought was he wants me to go and raise money for Lubavitch. And I said to him, I'm not a very good fundraiser. And he said, Chas v'shalom, God forbid, I didn't ask you. We are going to pay for everything on your trip, which they did. The only thing we ask is that you increase the knowledge of Judaism and the attachment that people who didn't have the good fortune to learn in yeshiva or whatever, that they get an education. Now, I was amazed that the Rebbe, who has thousands of followers and had thousands of followers, chose me. And I certainly don't look like Lubavitcher. But here's the funny thing. After we traveled to Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Bangkok, Hong Kong, Tokyo, etc. In each of these places, Lubavitchers would set up the opportunity for people to attend. And I would speak to from 20 people to 20,000 people in one instance in all these various places. The Rebbe knew everything that had happened wherever I went and the success that I had. the first thing he said to me is, do you need anything? Is there anything special that you need a bracha? And I said, yes, I need a bracha for something. And I told him. He said, it will be fulfilled this year. And it was. And I don't want to go into the details, but incredible.
Wow.
And then he said to me a phrase for which I have become famous, if you will, in Chabad, in Lubavitch, around the world. He said to me, I want you to know that you, pointed to me, are a chassid in camouflage, which is such a great line. I'm a chassid in camouflage. Well, what he meant by that, aside from the obvious that I don't look like a Lubavitcher, is that I am a Lubavitcher in my soul. And perhaps this is one of the great reasons, or the greatest reason for the success of Lubavitch, because Lubavitch did not and does not look at externals. Now, especially in those days, if you looked at me, I remember there were places I went and I would identify myself as a rabbi and they would say Reform. I say, no, conservative. What I say Orthodox, because people still have the impression that the Orthodox rabbi has to look like a chassid or have a beard and so on. It was extremely important in those days. We are talking now about the time in the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s of the former century. There were many people who predicted the demise of Judaism, and in particular of Orthodox Judaism. There were people who said that that may have been okay for Europe, but nobody's going to buy into this, and people who represent another world, another culture, don't have anything to give us today. What my impression is that Lubavitcher purposely picked me because I didn't look like one of his Hasidim, but I had exactly the same philosophy, religiosity, spirituality as they all did and do. And this would be a breakthrough, that you don't have to be someone who is unaware that the Yankees lost the World Series this year or other major tragedies, just kibitzing, obviously, that you can be au courant, you can be aware of the world, you can read the newspaper, know what's happening, be sensitive to the world around you, write books, and yet be totally committed. This past year was something that happened that was absolutely amazing. Now, YU is Yeshiva University with secular courses as well. Years ago, that would have been considered by very frum people as treif, because you're merging the two and they're impossible to be merged. Well, for the first time this year, Lubavitch Chabad opened a club at Yeshiva University. The club functions beautifully, working together, learning at times together, sharing Hasidus and other topics that are parcel of Judaism. And for their big opening of this demonstration of unity, and Hasidus is part of Judaism, as is Lubavitch, and we're all one people, they had a major gathering at the graveside of Lubavitcher Rebbe, and I was asked to be the keynote speaker. And it was a magnificent demonstration of not just Achdus, the oneness of the Jewish people, but also of the fact that somebody who looks like me could be the spokesman, because we encompass everything. And the fact that the Rebbe selected me is one of the highlights of my life. So I am known now as the chassid in camouflage.
I love that.
Yeah, it's funny that Lubavitch calls its representatives Tzivos Hashem, the army of God, because they say we each have a role to play. We are God's army. So I put an addendum to that, and I am part of the Secret Service.
Yeah.
Because I was able to be a member of the group who helped to spread the message. And again, the Rebbe said that I achieved a tremendous amount in all these various areas. My goal is not to make Lubavitcher Hasidim. I'm not saying that I made them into Chabadniks, but I made them into people who believed in God and in various measures saw the beauty of Judaism. So that's one of my highlights.
That's really beautiful. And you mentioned before, and I know it's like one of your most popular books, about the Vatican and your multiple experiences with the Pope. I don't want to skip anything. Could you start me off with how that began?
Yeah, I would really answer that by saying it was God's reward to me for my work, for the things I'd accomplished, including Chabad and including teaching so many thousands of students at Yeshiva University, because in my wildest dreams, I never, ever would have thought that I would meet the Pope, that I would have an opportunity to accomplish things that are unheard of and things that are not yet finished, that are in progress to this very day. So we have a limited amount of time, but a tremendous amount of story.
Yeah.
I will tell you the gist of it. Goes back to post 9/11, and there were doctors from around the world who came to discuss spirituality in the age of post 9/11, and they had a conference of about 5,000 doctors who met in New York City, and this was beautiful. They dedicated the conference to the victims of 9/11 and also to Maimonides, for the following reason. Obviously, a lot of Jews are doctors are Jews. I'm not saying that they controlled the entire agenda and wrote what the subjects should be, but there were enough of them who said that post 9/11, the world needs the kind of medicine that was taught by Maimonides, which included God and which included spirituality. I'm sure you'll have other people who can speak at great length, and probably you do have had programs on Maimonides and Jewish people. Maimonides, to be one person and accomplish what he did. We have a saying in Judaism, from Moshe to Moshe, from Moses to Moses, there was none like Moses. So this conference said that they needed somebody, a rabbi, in addition to everything else that they were talking about vis-a-vis how the world has to react post 9/11 politically, etc. We need somebody to explain who Maimonides was and why he's so significant for our generation. And because some people had read my books, they asked me to be the guest speaker. And before the program started, my wife was milling around, and she meets somebody who comes over to her, and he says, I'd like to introduce myself, that I am one of two Jews in the world who has been granted title by the Vatican it's a title of honor that is not given to Jews or to anybody except for them, because of work that he had done for the Vatican. And he said he knew that my wife was my wife, and he said, I see that your husband is going to be speaking. I'd like to introduce myself. I have been awarded some honors by the Vatican, and I'd love to speak to your husband. So after I finished, I met with him, and he said, I just want you to know that I have connections with the Vatican, with the Pope, and if there's ever anything that you need from the church, give me a call, and here's my card. I'd love to be able to help you out. Now, I assumed that this was somebody who was very proud of his achievements, as he probably should be, but was boasting a little bit, because you don't get a guy coming over to you and saying, and I know the Pope and I have connections with the Vatican. And by the way, if there's ever anything you need, why don't you give me a call? Right. I had his card. He had my card. And 2 weeks later, he says, hi, this is Gary Krupp. That was his name. We spoke, and I said to you, if there's ever anything you need, well, I just have the opportunity now to be able to invite you if you want to come to Rome to meet the Pope. I said to him, let me look at my schedule. That was just a joke, because I couldn't believe what he was saying. He's inviting me to go meet the Pope. That's absurd. Bottom line, he was not kidding. Bottom line, first of all, Pope John Paul II, who at that time was the Pope, was a great Ohev Yisrael, lover of the Jewish people, whereas other popes before and after would not go to Jerusalem, would not go to Israel. He went to the Kotel, and here's a story that many people do not know. Most people do not know. You know that we read a prayer called a kvittel to put into the Kotel, into the wall. Now, that prayer is supposed to be a very personal kind of prayer between you or whoever puts the prayer in and God. Mm-hmm. And obviously, they told the Pope nobody was supposed to look at that prayer. However, unfortunately or fortunately, somebody did. Not right. I condemn the fact that it was done. But we then saw what Pope John Paul II wrote was, I beg you, God, O Lord, to forgive the church for the crimes of anti-Semitism perpetrated against the Jewish people throughout the centuries. Now that's incredible.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable that Pope John Paul II, he was a great lover of Jewish people. I'll tell you another story, which I subsequently learned. Pope John Paul II became ill. As a matter of fact, it was the sickness that caused his death. He went to Gary Krupp, the gentleman that I mentioned, and he said, one of the things I have never done yet, but that I would like to do, is have a meeting with rabbis. I wonder if you could get me a group together of rabbis, and perhaps they could give me a blessing, I could give them a blessing. What I'm saying, and I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way, and I don't want it to be misinterpreted in a way that almost makes the Pope look like he's asking for rabbis to give him a blessing because he thinks we have all the power or something. What I do want to convey is that having this belief that Jews were the origin of Christianity and Catholicism, he did want rabbis come to Rome, have somebody bring a group that turned out to be me. I got 175 rabbis together in order to make it a representative group. It had to be Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform, yes. And we went to the Apostolic Palace and had a meeting with the Pope, at which one thing is amazing, a lot of people are unaware of it. In the Talmud, it says that when we meet a king or a chief representative of even another religion, we make a blessing. We made a blessing for him. We made a blessing on seeing him. And we made a blessing for him. The bishops and cardinals and others who were there said this is the first time in history that there is an occasion of this nature, that we are unified in prayers for each other. It's a remarkable story. That's just the beginning of the story.
I'm fascinated, and you're doing all the work. It's great for me. I get to just listen and be amazed.
People there could not believe he actually shook the hand of every single rabbi there. We went up to where he was sitting, and normally there's a step there which forces you, if you're going to go up, to in fact kneel. And they removed that step out of courtesy and consideration, out of knowledge that Jews do not kneel to anybody. Remember Mordechai and Haman, and we would not be put in a position whereby we would have to kneel to the Pope. But the Pope, he felt very strongly that he wanted to give us proper respect.
We'll be back to this week's episode, but I want to tell you about Simcha Time. So until now, if you've heard the past few podcasts, you've been hearing me talk about the revolution of Simcha Time, who it's Le'ilu Nishma, Simcha Belsky, Simcha Beryl, David ben Avram Moshe, who was someone who just exuded being kind and being there for others and going out of his way to help others. So till now, you've been hearing me talk about how important it is to be the one to go ahead and do the chesed. But this week, I guess I mentioned at the end, but spoiler, we have a baby, and you'll hear me talk about it a little more. It's a very exciting week. Very busy, and we've been getting so much love and care and chesed from people. And I think for some people, it's been easy for them. Easy in the sense that, okay, they're right there. They have to be making this. They want to make extra. But I'm sure there were some of the people there that have helped us. They made a meal for us. They picked up my child from daycare. Michal did. Michal, she's in the next room. Michal, shout out to you. Thank you. Michal, you're on the podcast. Michal says hi. Michal went ahead and picked up my son from daycare while I was busy here finishing up a podcast, and it was very helpful. So the goal of Simcha Time is to really go ahead, go out of your way and to do a chesed for someone else. And then it doesn't end there. You do a Simcha Time. You go around the table on Shabbos and you say, hey, this is what I did. And you kind of like gamify what you're doing to really help your children, yourself, be conscious of those acts of chesed that we go out of our way to do. So this week, go ahead and go out and do something unexpected. Do something that you didn't think you'd do when you woke up, but it went ahead and helped someone. So be like Michal and do a Simcha Time now. And you could also, by the way, go on to simchatime.org and submit your Simcha Times there. Don't forget to do that. Now, back to this week's episode.
I discovered this from people who were close to the Pope. What made him feel so strongly? In youth, as a little boy, he had a best friend. His best friend was Jewish. They would meet after church services on Sunday and play soccer. One time, this little boy friend didn't see his friend who eventually became Pope. And he went into the church and looked, and somebody said to him, "What are you doing here, Jew boy? You don't belong in here." And the man who would be Pope said, "Don't you ever talk to him that way. He is God's child, and we are all children of God." So as a young boy, he already, John Paul, had this great feeling of unity of all peoples. Very few people know the next story that I'm going to tell you, that John Paul was a very good-looking guy, and he originally, as a very young man, wanted to be an actor. He went to an acting school, and one day the Nazis came into the school, and they said, "Are there any Jewish teachers here?" And they said, "Yes. If you're Jewish, raise your hand, and then form a line over there." They did. And so Nazi soldiers went ahead and shot them and killed them on the spot. And he was with the Pope, not the Pope at the time, was witness to this. So that gave him a real feeling of unity and of awareness that there are those who are evil, and the Jewish people are put to death for no reason, and the entire Holocaust subsequent story is something that was even more meaningful to him because he saw the cruelty and the evil of it initially. Now, let's get back to more direct. Gary Krupp said to me, now, tell me, is there anything that you would want for the church to do for you? Is there anything you need? And I smiled and I said, but this is part of my sense of humor. I said, yeah, it would be nice if the church gave us back all the things that throughout the centuries they took from our people. By that I mean, obviously. I mean books that were written. I mean original volumes written by the Rambam included. But I mean even, people ask me, did the church have anything to do with the items in the Beit HaMikdash in the temple? Yes, they did. Did they take any of them? Yes, they did. Now, this is not the venue for me to discuss the question of whether the Vatican has the menorah in their possession. In all probability, the menorah was taken by the vassals and probably sunk. That's what historians believe. Lubavitch Rebbe believed that they actually had and have the menorah. I won't go into the historicity of this, the veracity of this conclusion, but I will tell you the following. When I was there at this occasion, I met somebody who was introduced to me as a Jewish soldier in the Italian army during the war, and he was responsible for a major victory, and the Italians didn't have many of those. And he, they didn't know he was Jewish, witnessed something that was remarkable. The church, in order to thank the people in this unit who had done this wonderful thing, said, you are invited to come 14 floors below.
Wow.
In the bottom of the Vatican to see things that nobody else has been permitted to see. You must not reveal what you saw. You must promise not to reveal. Now, I'm telling you, we are on the air, I understand, but I hope we get 1 million listeners, but I'm not quite sure that we will. I want to tell you that he said that he saw the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol. It's one of the vessels that the high priest wore that was in the basement. And he saw yet one other thing that I don't want to mention, not the menorah, that was in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, which when Rome came and destroyed the Tisha B'Av that we commemorate to this day of destruction of the temple, that is still in their hands, and there are other items that they possess.
Hold on. He is Gary?
No.
Who's he?
He is the Italian Jew who's alive today, who was in the army, in the Italian army, in a unit that had a miraculous victory about which the church rejoiced and said, as a reward, we will allow you to go 16 floors below where we have some objects that nobody is allowed to see. And he showed them to him. And this guy, the chief rabbi of Rome, said to me, if he tells you this, you can believe him. You may believe that he actually saw what he's telling you he saw.
Why don't you want to say one of the items that he saw?
Because that's remarkable that they have to this day items. Now, when we went to Rome, the rabbis, in addition to that, we had a private meeting. And it was with the Pope's right-hand man, and it was with a bishop, a top man. And they again said, is there anything we can do for you? Now, I wasn't going to be as blunt as I was previously when I said, yeah, give us back the stuff. Although I want to tell you that when I have said over the story, there are people who say to me, why didn't you say to them, give us back all the stuff that you stole from? Come on. That isn't going to happen, and that's not the way anything political can be accomplished.
Right.
However, what I want to make clear is that the church today does have a number of major items. The one thing that they will admit to is books, holy books written by Jewish giants, including Maimonides, many of which have never been seen by Jewish eyes. They have them, and it would be wonderful if we could have them returned, right? That would be a great thing. And, okay, I will tell you this story. I hesitate because there are some things that I don't want to create ill will and bad feelings between. However, in this meeting, I asked Cardinal Mejia. Cardinal Mejia was top man. I said, I do know that you have books, I said it that way, or perhaps some other items that belonged to the Jewish people. Somehow you were able to get them. About how many items of Jewish interest, Jewish background, Judaica, does the Vatican have? And he thought for a moment. Now, this answer is going to lay you away, just as it did me when I was there. And he said, we have about 6 million items.
That's 6 million.
Now, I do not know to this day what he's counting. Now, maybe he's counting coins, Jewish coins, and that's how you get up to that number. Or maybe he's counting books of folio pages. It seems incredible to me. I know that you're talking about 6 million items. But I think the real point of the story is that he said a number which has so much power, such an impact on every single Jew. And he was insensitive to that. He says 6 million, and for every Jew alive today. 6 million is the number of people who perished, who were put to death for being Jewish. And the church has 6 million items. And he says 6 million and doesn't say what a remarkable coincidence. So it doesn't say just like the number who perished in the Holocaust. Wow. I say to myself, maybe it's a godly way of saying to us, they may have destroyed 6 million, but some aspect of 6 million still remains to this day. Now, we don't have those items, and what we need is communication and goodwill and the opportunity to get some of them back. So, not being a politician, but knowing a little bit about good politics, I said it would be wonderful if we could get some of these items at least on loan.
We'll take 1 million of them.
Yeah,
you know,
if you ask for too much, there's a Gemara that says, "Tafasta baruba lo tafasta." If you ask for too much, you don't get anything, and everybody knows that. And if you're a little child and you're going to ask, "Get me 2 ponies" or something, you know, you're not going to get a thing.
Right.
But if you ask for a little bit, so I said it would be wonderful if we could, and if you will allow me to backtrack just for a second, before I went on this mission, I went to a number of Gedolim. Gedolim, that's great people who probably are smarter than me and are very into Jewish history and are aware of whatever had happened with the church and Jews and the things that they might have in their possession. I said, if I could ask for anything, what would be something that's possible and that would be huge? And they said, the Rambam. They have some of the original works of the Rambam. Why don't you ask if they could be brought out to come on tour? Why don't you ask to see them first? So I said, that's what I would like. I would like to see the Rambam with my own eyes, see the writings, and discuss perhaps they could go on tour. Well, a lot to the story, but okay. Another meeting was scheduled, and they were going to bring up some folio pages that are in their library and include some pages of the Rambam. Now, when I spoke to some Gedolim, it seems that in the text of the Rambam, scholars, Jewish scholars, have been perplexed tremendously by a ruling that appears to be a mistake, and that probably was a To'at Sofer, a scribal error. And this has halachic ramifications, and it has to do with how marriage is performed. For those listeners who know, there are 3 ways in which to make a marriage legal. And in the version that we have, it says one of them is biblical and the 2 are rabbinic. And he says that the transfer of an object of money is merely rabbinic. Now, we do that not with money, but with a ring, but that's actually biblical. And it doesn't make sense. So they told me, if you could get them to show you that original, the page that is the Rambam and what he says, would be mind-blowing. So I couldn't ask for a specific page because they said they're just going to get
random
5 folio pages they'll put out. Okay. We get to that event. I take a look.
Hold on, wait, just to clarify. That event is in the Vatican?
In the Vatican Library.
Which is a few floors down also, or no?
Which is closed to almost everybody.
Okay.
Which represented a move on their part for good feelings between us. They got somebody there to take out 5 pages and put them under glass and let me see them. And when I noticed that they had just brought 5 sample pages out of tens of thousands, I said,
no.
Like, what am I going to do? And what I'm going to tell you next is a miracle. What I'm going to tell you next is, a matter of fact, I wrote it up and it appears in a Catholic magazine that has 15 million readers. The miracle of the 1 page that appeared, that was exactly the page that I was looking for, and differs textually from the texts that we have been teaching throughout all these generations since the Rambam wrote it. It was a scribal error.
Wow.
And now Rabbi Steinsaltz, when he redid the works of Rambam, they have changed the print to what we found.
Really?
Because we took a picture. They said no pictures, and I took a picture.
Did you really?
Yes, I did.
Secretly, or like did the flash go?
Secretly, yeah.
Well,
I mean, they may have seen it, that they didn't.
With your phone?
My phone. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Is this picture public or no?
It could be public.
I would love to see the picture. I don't know. I want to see the Rambam's handwriting. The end is, they're all biblical?
Kesef is biblical, and the Rambam wrote it that way. And it has been a mistake that's been carried on throughout the centuries as scribal error. So this is a remarkable, miraculous kind of thing. To add to it, I said there were 5 pages. So the page alongside of it, I said, well, wouldn't it be something that was also important? The next page had a Rambam halacha law, which comes from the Talmud, which is the following. If we are walking in the street and I see a $100 bill and I'm about to run over and grab it, and somebody else sees it afterwards because he heard me screaming out, and he rushes over and takes it. I say, hey, that's mine. I called it. It's he says, yeah, you may have seen it first, but I picked it up first. The law from the Talmud is Ria B'alma Lo Kanya. Ria, seeing alone, does not acquire an object for you, and therefore whoever picked it up, because anyone can say, I saw it first. Anyhow, that page, that particular law was alongside of this. That's 2 out of 5 had some meaning, because all it took was for me to think for a moment, and I recognized that God was sending me a message. And the message was, look, Blech, you're looking at this thing. You're looking at it, but Ria B'alma, seeing alone, does not acquire it, which means your job is to keep at it until the time comes when you can acquire it again for the Jewish people. So we got that to go on tour. As a matter of fact, Father Farina was somebody who at that time was just a Father Farina. He subsequently became head of the library. He had said, when that goes on tour, I wanna go with you. First they asked, where will it be going? And I said, we'll probably send it to Brooklyn, where there are Hasidic groups, whatever. I meant to take it to Jerusalem, to take it to the Israel Museum, to take it to our homeland. But I wasn't going to tell them that, because the minute I would have said that, and I was correct subsequently, I learned, if I would have said it's going to Israel, it never would have gotten out of there. Father Farina said, that would be amazing. And if we would go out on tour and you bring it to Israel, I would love to be there. So in other words, wow. he caught me and said, I know what you're saying. And I really know that you want to take it to Israel. And a few years later, it went on tour, and it was at the Israel Museum, and we invited him. And in fact, that was payback number 1.
We'll be right back this episode, and I'm telling you, there are incredible stories coming up, so stick around. But first, let me tell you about another podcast that I've been loving. It's called the Unrestricted Podcast, and you've heard me talk about them before, but I particularly want to tell you about their latest episode. So I'm always looking for guests, and I'm always listening to other podcasts. And honestly, for me, it's a chore. When you're listening to podcasts, you're looking for leisure, you want to learn something. For me, it's like I want to listen to better my craft. I want to become a better podcaster, but also I'm always looking for other guests. And this Unrestricted Podcast, I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to get this rabbi on my show. I've heard about him, but like after hearing this episode on Unrestricted, I was like, wow, incredible. So if you like inspiration, I highly recommend you listen to the episode with Rabbi Pinchas Goldschmidt. I actually did a panel with his daughter-in-law recently, but it has nothing to do with the rabbi. I mean, I guess it's his daughter-in-law, but Pinchas Goldschmidt was the chief rabbi of Moscow for many years, I think from like 1993 to 2000. I don't know when. Actually, I don't know exactly when. You can find that on Wikipedia. But he was the chief rabbi, very influential, building the community there. And then recently with the whole entire war in Ukraine and just other things that happened, he basically was against it and did not feel it was the right thing to do. And in a place like Russia, that's not safe to do, especially if you're a rabbi of a big position. And he basically had to like flee the country and run away, and he's in Israel now. But it's fascinating to hear how he built up the community there in Moscow, what he's up to now. And it's, that episode is just a dream come true. And like you always, I was just talking about this on a podcast that didn't air yet, but we were talking about the goal of any podcast is to get someone to just be comfortable and share really what they're feeling. And I really felt that the host, Steven Savitsky, did such a good job in this episode, and the rabbi opened up and it was incredible. So go ahead and check out the Unrestricted Podcast. There'll be links in the show notes. Now back to this week's episode.
Okay, so that was the first time.
I subsequently met with the Pope one more time. Now, meeting with the Pope, I mean Pope John Paul II, who was the friendliest and the best as far as we were concerned. Unfortunately, he passed away, and my wife and I met Pope Benedict, and we were at the installation, so to speak, and that was moving, but it was not like the first, and he was not like, and he abdicated his position, and the outside world still does not know why, but that's another story. I've had an opportunity as a result of this to have a great blessing come into my life. There are many things that we call basher. They're part and parcel of divine payback. Nothing happens without a reason. Now, when I brought the large group in, the 175 rabbis, I was involved with bureaucracy, with arrangements, and the ways in which I would be able to hopefully get what I wanted with the Rambam and books and items. The rabbis went to the Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel has the amazing work of Michelangelo, and they come back and they tell me, you missed something that's unbelievable, because we had a Jewish guide, not just a Jewish guide, but a religious Jewish guide. And we heard things that are unbelievable in terms of Michelangelo incorporating Jewish secrets of Kabbalah into the paintings that he did on the ceiling. And that there is a tremendous amount of Jewish stuff because Michelangelo was adopted by Lorenzo de' Medici, the wealthiest man in the world at the time, who hired a teacher for his children, Pico della Mirandola. And Pico, although he was a Catholic, owned the largest library of Kabbalah in the world at the time and was enamored of Jewish commentary and knew Midrash and Talmud and taught much of this to the children that he was primarily hired for. But Michelangelo also studied under him. So Michelangelo had tremendous insights which came to him from Jewish subjects. And Michelangelo was incensed at the way in which the church was treating the Jews. This was at the time in the end of the 1400s, right before the Inquisition and the expulsion from Spain. So Michelangelo, who had been asked by the Pope to do Jesus and the Virgin Mary in painting the Sistine Chapel, decided not to listen to the Pope and instead did the first two Sedras of the Chumash, Bereshis through Noach, and some of the most famous artwork in the world, in history, have hidden messages that were really meant to convey universal truths and ideas that were foreign to Christianity, and in some cases heresy for Christianity. Because according to Christianity then, and for many now, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're damned to hell, no matter how good you may be. This offended Michelangelo, and he incorporated ideas that were solely rooted in Torah and in Jewish thought. The guy who told this, my dear friend Roy, who told this to the rabbi said to me, you have to write a book on this. And he said, I'm not a writer. And they said, well, the rabbi who's arranged this entire thing, he has written a number of books. Why don't you work together with him? Roy Doliner is his name. And he said, okay, let me meet Rabbi Blech. We met, we hit it off like this. And we wrote the book called The Sistine Secrets, Michelangelo's Forbidden Messages in the Heart of the Vatican. We wrote it together, came back, thank God for email, thank God for the ability to communicate. It took us about a year to write the book. That book is now in 26 countries, translated into 16 other languages, and tells the truth about the Sistine Chapel and its Jewish origin. Do you know that the Sistine Chapel in Rome, the Pope wanted to express the idea that Judaism was replaced by Christianity. And that's a crucial idea in Christian theology. The replacement theory, meaning that once Jesus came along, the Torah became the Old Testament replaced by the New, and Jerusalem is replaced by Rome, and the Beit HaMikdash is replaced by the Sistine Chapel. Did you know? No, I'm sure you didn't know that the Sistine Chapel was built in accord with the specifications as indicated in the book of Samuel, exactly to conform to the Beit HaMikdash, the temple. The temple. That's just in terms of the building. Now, the artwork that people who study art say is, there are two giants. There's Da Vinci and there's Michelangelo, but Michelangelo probably is the ultimate. And the ultimate work of art that millions of people come to see every year. It's the most visited museum in the world. Actually has tons of Jewish messages, pro-Jewish messages that are meant to replace Christian ideas that were anti-Semitic. It's almost like today, what's his name? This guy West.
Kanye West?
Yes.
Did not anticipate his name coming up in this interview, but yeah.
I'm simply saying that here is a guy who dares to spout true anti-Semitism. Thank God he just lost he lost $1 billion because he can no longer be a spokesman for Adidas. However, if you just try to understand that what West has been saying was for a long time the view of the church, and Michelangelo is the hero of a major historic story coming to the world of art. But in that time, there were no movies. Art was the spokesman for people who had messages. The messages of Judaism are hidden and incorporated in the Sistine Chapel. And I urge everyone to buy the book, The Sistine Secrets.
I'll have a link in the show notes for people.
And read all about it. Now, I want to tell you, this is a fascinating part of the story. There are many people in the church who were disturbed by this because the content of the book makes clear that Michelangelo was deeply pained by the insensitivity and, if you will, the anti-Semitism of the church at that time. I say that now because I don't want anyone to take offense now. The church today has tried in many ways to make amends for that. But at that time, you were talking about a hateful anti-Semitic religion that said anybody who does not believe in what we believe is doomed to eternal hell. And here is Michelangelo almost saying it. Not for real, clearly, because off with his head, he would have been killed. But he is told by the Pope to do something in honor of Jesus and the Virgin Mary. And when the Pope finally came to look at it, because Michelangelo did it while he was up in the air and you couldn't see anything below because he made sure to have a canvas underneath what he was painting, lo and behold, 95% of everything that he did in the Sistine Chapel is what is called Old Testament, is Chumash, Tanakh is our Bible, and 5% is pagan. That's the Sistine Chapel. That's incredible. Wow.
That's incredible.
We'll be right back this week's episode. And I'm telling you, the gem, the crazy, crazy story didn't even come up yet. So Hang tight. But first, let me tell you about the JOWMA podcast. You heard me talk about it before. So insightful, so educational, but also entertaining. They let me first read you a few of the topics that I'm like. After the chuppah, the confident kala. There's 2 parts to that. How to talk about adult-like stuff with children. Speak up, a discussion about selective mutism, which I know someone that had that and they actually got over it. I don't know if that's the proper phrase to say they got over it, but that's what I'm thinking. Birth stories with a doula. We have a weight problem and so many more important topics that it's something that doesn't really get covered on this show because it's a different type of show. Go through it. They have such a wide range of topics and they bring on really, really good flow experts that like really have been in the field and know what they're talking about. So go ahead and check out their podcast. And if you have any medical related type of questions for JOWMA, which stands for Jewish Orthodox Women's Medical Association, by the way, you could give their hotline a call. It's 929-4GESUNT. That's GEZUNT. You call them 24/6 and you could ask your questions. They're board certified. They're amazing. And their link to their podcast and their hotline will be in the show notes. Now back to this week's episode.
I have a million questions on it, but we need to wrap up soon. So I'm going to ask you a few more questions because we have about like 10 minutes left. If you could meet one person in history who's no longer with us, who would it be? I think for you in particular, it's a harder question than most people because you know so much about history and the people from it. But who would it be if you could spend an hour with them?
There's a great saying. I think I mentioned it before. Min Moshe ad Moshe lo kam k'Moshe. From Moses to Moses, there was none like Moses. Moses, Maimonides, and Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. Boy, I'd love to meet either one of them because we are a people of tradition. We are a people who go back to Sinai, and going back to Sinai is going back to God. We are, Rabbi Soloveitchik said this, so if there are any listeners who think that it's incorrect, I'm basing myself on what Rabbi Soloveitchik said. We are the only religion in the world that begins not with one person coming along and saying, God came to me and told me to tell you, because anyone could have done that. And if the person were either a charlatan or were misguided or were crazy, the entire religion falls by the wayside. Our religion begins with a revelation of God to 2 million people who subsequently passed it on to their children and to their children. That means it is something that was given and heard to which we were witnesses. Now, if somebody says, I don't believe that Abraham Lincoln lived, you say, you're crazy. Of course he lived. And then you persist. Well, how do I know? I didn't meet him. That's the equivalent of saying that there are millions of people who had contact, who were aware. History is history. History for Jews is his story with a capital H, is the story of God saying, I want to reveal myself so that the Jewish people know how to live and to be the teachers of humankind. So to do that, we have 2 people. One, Moses. If I'm asking too much, well, Moshe Rabbeinu is our teacher. By the way, the letters of Moshe Rabbeinu, if you add them up, total 613, because he taught us the 613 mitzvah. I'd love to have a chat with him. But maybe, again, that's asking for too much because he's on a totally different plane. The man who best transmitted all this and understood it was Moses ben Maimon, who was called Maimonides because Ides, I-D-E-S, means son of Maimonides. And the best line I ever heard was that many people can't believe that Maimonides was one person because he was a library, because he himself, Plus, he was a physician who worked full-time, and after he finished work, he describes what his day was like. He took care of the Sultan of Egypt, who called upon him as his doctor, and did everything else that he did from Jewish perspective. Some of the work that he did medically still quoted today. There's a Dr. Fred Reisner who has taken his work, Maimonides' work in Arabic, and translated it. And there are doctors today who say this is brilliant, even from the perspective of today. Boy, I'd love to meet the Rambam, just as I was seeking to find something in his handwriting.
I'm going to ask you 2 more questions because we're running out of time. The second last question is, out of the 613 mitzvahs, which mitzvah would you say is your favorite mitzvah? And it's a hard question to answer. Maybe as of today, which mitzvah do you feel a little more connected to than the others?
Well, the question was asked. The question was asked not in the Babylonian Talmud, but in the Jerusalem Talmud. And it was asked as to what is the most important verse. There were three answers, but the one that I like the best is the one that Rabbi Akiva said. Love your neighbor as yourself. What that really means to me is, if you believe that there is a God who created the world and told us how to live life meaningfully, God more than anything else, just like a parent would say, if you want to be my friend, you better treat my kids right. And if you mistreat my kids, don't ever talk to me again. God is concerned with how you act with God's children. There are so many people, forgive me, so many people who think that they are super pious, but their relationship with others is terrible. Their relationship with people and concern for others means that they're not religious. When people say, I am religious, and they mean only that they pray 3 times a day, or they eat kosher food, etc., then that's misunderstanding religion. I will tell you one short story. Two of our kids moved to Israel. They have to buy furniture. They have to furnish their new homes. They go to Jerusalem, and as they pass a furniture store, they see a lovely sight. There is the owner sitting like by the window with a book of the Talmud studying Torah. They say, this must be the place. And they go and they buy a ton of stuff from this man who is a, quote, religious man. And they subsequently found out they were taken for a ride, that this was a crook. And that is unfortunately a story that gets repeated in many ways. And if you ask him, he will tell you on Yom Kippur that I'm very close to God, and he will act as if he is a holy man. I have had holy men from whom I suffered. And I know that the best way to tell is the advice that somebody gave to a girl who was going out with a guy on a first date to a restaurant. And he said, you know what? If you want to really know whether this is a good guy or not, see how he treats the waiter. See how he talks to the waiter, where he's in a position where he's paying and see how you treat people on a social level below you. I was a rabbi for 37 years in a congregation, and there were different people. Many people who thought that they were super pious, but the way they treated others, sometimes myself included, are not my definition of religion. Religious person understands that the goal is if you take, last thing I want to say, the first word and the last word of the 10 Commandments. The first word is Anochi, I. First to God, I am the Lord your God. I ask my students, now what's the last word of the Aseret HaTorah? Most of them don't know.
I have no clue.
No clue.
I'll know after this.
Yes. L'reyecha, to your neighbor. Wow. Those are the bookends. I and to your neighbor. The reason I goes first is because if you really believe in an I who is the creator, if you really believe in a God who keeps score and who knows what you do and how you live your life, then you will live it in such a way that to your neighbor, you express divinity. To your neighbor, you indicate that a person who believes in God lives in a manner that never mistreats God's children, but brings pride and glory and credit to being a Jew.
That's really beautiful. Well, I wouldn't be able to finish this interview without mentioning the fact that, first of all, happy birthday to you.
Oh, how nice. Thank you.
You're 89 years young, from what I understand.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, I mean,
I
definitely
don't believe it myself.
You don't seem like you're 89 at all. Seem way more youthful, very knowledgeable. But that, and also you have an upcoming anniversary.
Yes.
65?
65. Wow, you've really done your homework.
I got to do my research. So mazel tov on that. And I know I could do a whole, literally another 17 hours about my next question, but I'm just going to try to sum up into one question. From all your experiences, from like being a Rav, a rabbi, a leader, a book writer, what's one message that you want to give over to everyone? Obviously, you gave a lot of beautiful messages now, but if you could say one thing, I mean, technically could have even finished off on what you just last said, which was beautiful, but what's one message you could give to everyone?
Live your life with meaning. If you are here, you're here for a reason. I wrote a book, Hope, Not Fear, in which I told the story of how about 9 years ago, I went to the doctor, and for my annual physical, the doctor said, I need for your wife to be present as well. Call her, we'll wait till she gets here, and then I'll tell you something. We called my wife, and she came, and the doctor said, I don't know how to break this to you, but you have a disease for which there is no cure. And when I looked it up, I didn't ask him, but when I looked it up on the internet, it says you live about 6 months. Live about 6 months. And I said to myself, that's all I got. That's great. It's impossible. How could that be? What? And I'm here today.
How long ago was that?
And that was 9 years ago. I want to tell you that the doctor who treated me goes around and talks about cardiac amyloidosis. My heart, the walls of the heart harden, and then you go. It stopped hardening miraculously. The doctor, when he lectures around the world, says, all my patients, they die in a short period of time, 6 months to a year. But I have one man, a rabbi, and he's still alive. I don't understand it. What I am saying to you is, I do understand it. And I live my life that way, and people have to live their lives that way. God was able to say, if I keep him alive longer, he will do something with his life. I tell the kids, they're not kids anymore, my students at YU, Yeshiva University, you're keeping me alive, because in my teaching you Torah, God must be saying he's living life with meaning and doing something that's good for me, for God. If you do something that is significant, if you leave a legacy, not make more money, because I have never seen a tombstone that says the name died with $5 billion, died with $100 million. That's not what it says. What? I saw a person had a card once gave me, what on earth are you doing for heaven's sake? What on earth are you doing for heaven's sake? I believe in God, and in believing in God has to make me a better person. Now, a better person is defined by the Torah, is explained by the Torah, becomes part and parcel of the 613 and whatever it means to be a Jew. But you didn't ask me that question. Yes. What do you need most important of all to acknowledge? Acknowledge that your life must have meaning. Give it meaning, and you will live long, or as long as God feels it's important for the world, not just for you, for the world to have you around. Obviously, the books that I write, the places that I speak, the people that I influence has cosmic significance to the extent that I'm 89 years old and I don't look it, and I still speak without signs of senility that might be appropriate for a president, but not for me.
I feel like if you gave the Pope a bracha, I want a bracha also. Could we finish off with a bracha for me and for people listening?
Oh my God, that's so beautiful. That is so beautiful. I wish you and everybody who listens be granted the gift of understanding the ideas that we discussed to the extent that it will make you someone worthy of blessings of life, of happiness, of joy, of fulfillment.
Amen. Thank you very much, Rabbi Blech.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Okay, you made it to the end. I hope you didn't skip to the end. You listened or watched the entire episode, because, that was great. That was really inspiring. So this week, thank God, my wife and I moved into our house on Sunday, and on Monday we had our girl, our baby daughter. So we're very excited to both move into our house and have a daughter. We don't recommend doing everything on the same week or even like within the same few hours of each other. Wasn't planned to be this week. It was actually, we're supposed to have a baby Pesach, but this is great news, and I feel like, people who listen, your friends and family, so I want to share that good news with you, and you should also have only brachas in your life. If you got to this end of this episode, I want you to say the code word EPIC on YouTube. If you listen on Apple or Spotify, go ahead and give us 5 stars. If you enjoy this podcast, go ahead and listen to the latest episode of the Unrestricted Podcast. Get informed from the incredible JOWMA podcast, and continue the Simcha Time legacy by doing an extra chesed this week that you go out of your way for, and talk about it around your Shabbos table. Until next time, stay inspirational.
Living l'chaim.